continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Grind. Ryan Mitchell's hands were stained with grease and exhaustion as he clocked out of his third consecutive overnight shift at the industrial plant. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps, casting harsh shadows across his weathered face. At 34, the former Marine had the kind of build that came from years of discipline and hard work. Broad shoulders, calloused hands, and eyes that missed nothing. The drive home through the pre-dawn darkness gave him time to think about the stack of bills he'd been chipping away at for months. Tiffany's credit card debt had spiraled to nearly $40,000. Designer clothes, spa treatments, expensive dinners with her girlfriends while he ate gas station sandwiches between shifts. She'd come to him crying 6 months ago, claiming she'd made some mistakes and needed help. Ryan had believed her tears were genuine. He'd always been a man who honored his commitments, and marriage was the ultimate commitment. When Tiffany Lambert had walked into his life 3 years ago at his buddy's barbecue, she'd seemed like everything he wasn't: spontaneous, artistic, full of laughter. Her strawberry blonde hair caught the sunlight, and her green eyes sparkled with mischief. She worked part-time in an art gallery, more for fun than necessity, she told him. Coming from his military background where loyalty meant everything, Ryan had courted her properly. 6 months of dates, meeting her family, proposing with his grandmother's ring. Her mother Gloria had seemed pleased enough, though Ryan always sensed she thought Tiffany was settling. The wedding had been modest by Tiffany's standards, but had drained Ryan's savings. Now, pulling into the driveway of their small ranch house in suburban Phoenix, Ryan felt the weight of sacrifice in his bones. He'd taken the overnight shifts specifically because they paid 30% more, enough to cover the minimum payments on Tiffany's debt while still managing their mortgage and bills. She'd promised to get a full-time job to help, but somehow that never materialized. There was always an excuse. The gallery needed her for special events, or she was networking for her art career, or she wasn't feeling well. Ryan had grown up poor, the son of a single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat. He'd learned early that actions mattered more than words, that sacrifice was how you showed love. His mother had died of a heart attack during his second deployment to Afghanistan, working herself to death to pay for his youngest sister's college. He'd promised himself then that he'd never let the people he loved struggle the way she had. The house was dark except for the porch light Tiffany always left on for him. She'd be asleep, of course. Her art gallery job, when she actually showed up, didn't start until 10 in the morning. Ryan had suggested she might pick up some extra evening work since he was covering nights, but she'd looked at him like he'd suggested she become a street performer. He sat in his truck for a moment, looking at their home. The mortgage was in his name, bought with his military housing benefit. The furniture, the cars, even Tiffany's jewelry, all purchased with his earnings or credit. She contributed maybe $800 a month on a good month, barely enough to cover groceries. But marriage was about partnership, he reminded himself. She brought other things to their relationship: creativity, social connections, warmth. At least, that's what he kept telling himself during the long, solitary hours feeding materials into industrial machines while she slept in their comfortable bed. Ryan's phone buzzed with a text from his shift supervisor. "Double overtime available next week if you want it." He stared at the message, thumb hovering over the reply. The overtime would finally clear the last of Tiffany's debt. 3 months of 16-hour days, living on energy drinks and determination, but it would be done. He typed back, "I'll take it." As he walked to the front door, Ryan allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Tomorrow, he'd surprise Tiffany with the news that her debt was gone. Maybe they could finally start building something together instead of just surviving. Maybe she'd see how much he'd sacrificed and realize what they had was worth fighting for. The key turned silently in the lock. Years of military training had taught him to move quietly. He was already planning the conversation, imagining her face when he showed her the final payment confirmation. For the first time in months, Ryan Mitchell allowed himself to hope. Chapter 2. The Truth Revealed. 3 weeks later, Ryan stood in the shower at the plant, letting the hot water wash away another night's worth of chemical residue and sweat. The final payment had gone through that morning. $4, 847.32, the last of Tiffany's crushing debt. He'd watched his checking account balance drop to nearly zero, but the satisfaction was worth it. Tonight, he'd drive home with a paid-in full receipt and finally tell his wife they could breathe again. The drive home felt different this time. Instead of the usual weight of financial pressure, Ryan felt lighter. They could start over now. Maybe Tiffany would finally commit to finding steady work, and they could begin saving for the future they'd talked about. Maybe even starting a family. He'd stopped in an all-night diner and bought 2 cups of their best coffee and Tiffany's favorite chocolate croissants. She'd probably be awake soon anyway, and this would be the perfect way to share the good news. For once, he'd be bringing home celebration instead of exhaustion. The neighborhood was quiet at 6:30 a.m., most houses still dark behind drawn curtains. Ryan pulled into his driveway and sat for a moment, savoring the anticipation. In his jacket pocket, the receipt crinkled softly. $40,000 of debt, eliminated through sheer force of will and endless overnight shifts. As he approached the front door, he heard Tiffany's voice through the living room window. She was on the phone, laughing in that bright, musical way that had first attracted him. Maybe she was talking to her sister Lindsay, who lived in California. Ryan paused, not wanting to interrupt what sounded like a happy conversation. "Oh my God, Mom. You should have seen his face when I told him about the debt," Tiffany was saying, her voice carrying easily through the single-pane window. "Like a lost puppy. I swear, sometimes I think he'd work himself to death if I asked him to." Ryan's hand froze on the door handle. Something cold settled in his stomach. No, the idiot actually did it," Tiffany continued, and Ryan could hear Gloria's cackle on the other end of the line. $40,000, Mom. 40,000. And he never even questioned most of it. All those shopping trips I took with Brad, spa weekends, that jewelry, he just kept making payments like a good little soldier. The coffee cups slipped from Ryan's other hand, hitting the concrete porch with a muffled thud. But he couldn't move to pick them up, couldn't breathe properly. "Yes, the whole Brad situation is handled now," Tiffany was saying, and Ryan could hear her moving around the living room. "The debt was the only thing keeping me here, you know? I couldn't afford a decent divorce lawyer with all those payments hanging over me. But now, what about the house?" Gloria's voice was tinny but audible through the phone speaker. "That's the beauty of it, Mom. It's all in his name. The mortgage, everything. Arizona's a community property state, so I'm entitled to half the value, but I won't be stuck with the payments. And since I haven't worked full-time in 2 years, I'll probably get alimony too." Ryan's vision began to narrow, tunnel-like, the way it had during his worst moments in combat. But this was different. In Afghanistan, at least he'd known who the enemy was. "Brad's already got the apartment picked out," Tiffany continued. "Downtown Phoenix, 20th floor, overlooking the valley. His consulting business is doing really well. Did I tell you he's buying into that restaurant franchise? 3 locations. I'll never have to worry about money again." "And Ryan has no idea?" Gloria asked. "About Brad? God, no. Ryan's too trusting for his own good. Too noble." She said the word like it tasted bitter. "He actually thinks all those late nights at the gallery were about work. As if I'd spend my evenings arranging other people's art for $8 an hour." The laughter that followed felt like glass breaking in Ryan's chest. "Honestly, Mother, I don't know how I stood it this long. The constant worrying about bills, living in this little house, driving that beat-up car. Ryan's a good man, but he's so limited. No ambition beyond showing up to work every day. Brad actually has vision, you know? Plans. When will you tell him?" "Soon. I was waiting for him to finish paying off the debt. Didn't want him to stop out of spite. But yes, the idiot paid it all off. Now I can finally afford a good divorce lawyer. Bradley knows someone who specializes in maximizing settlements for women. This is going to work out perfectly." Ryan stood frozen on his own porch, listening to his wife plan his destruction with the casual tone most people use to discuss weekend plans. Every sacrifice he'd made, every double shift, every time he'd chosen her comfort over his own needs, it had all been theater to her. He was a resource to be mined until depleted, then discarded. His hand found the receipt in his pocket. Paid in full. The final proof of his devotion and the key to his wife's escape. Quietly, Ryan placed the receipt on the doormat, where Tiffany would find it when she eventually emerged from their house. He walked back to his truck, started the engine, and drove away. For the first time in months, Ryan Mitchell had no destination in mind. But for the first time in his adult life, he understood what it felt like to be truly, completely alone. Chapter 3. The Call. 2 weeks passed in a blur of cheap motels and long drives through the Arizona desert. Ryan had called in sick to work, something he'd never done in 3 years at the plant. His supervisor, Jerry, had sounded concerned on the phone, but Ryan had assured him it was just a family emergency that needed sorting out. That wasn't entirely a lie. He'd been staying at an extended stay motel off I-17, paying weekly rates and trying to figure out what came next. The place smelled like industrial disinfectant and broken dreams, but it was clean and anonymous. Ryan had always been a man who needed to process things alone, and the small room with its functional furniture and thin walls suited his current state of mind. His phone had been ringing constantly for the first week, Tiffany, her friends, even Gloria calling to check on him. He turned it off after the third day, needing silence to think. When he finally powered it back on, there were 37 missed calls and twice as many text messages. The text started concerned and gradually became frustrated. "Where are you? Are you okay? Ryan, this isn't funny. Come home so we can talk. People are asking questions. You're embarrassing me." "Fine. Be childish. But you can't avoid this forever." Ryan deleted them all without responding. He'd driven past their house twice, both times seeing Brad Coleman's silver BMW in the driveway. Brad was exactly what Ryan had expected. Tall, lean, the kind of man who looked like he'd never worked with his hand a day in his life. Ryan had done his research at the motel's business center, learning everything he could about Bradley Coleman. Age 36, marketing consultant, recently divorced, no children. Brad's social media painted a picture of expensive restaurants, weekend trips to Scottsdale, and a lifestyle that probably cost more in a month than Ryan made in 3. His LinkedIn showed a pattern of jumping between consulting firms every 2 years, always seeking new challenges. His divorce records, available through public documents, showed he'd been ordered to pay substantial alimony to his ex-wife for adultery. Apparently, Brad Coleman had a type. On a Thursday morning, Ryan's phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. Phoenix area code. Something told him to answer. "Mr. Mitchell? This is David Park from Sterling, Park & Associates. I represent your wife in a dissolution of marriage matter." Ryan sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the water stain on the opposite wall. "I see. Mrs. Mitchell has been concerned about your welfare, sir. She's asked me to reach out and see if we might arrange a meeting to discuss the terms of your separation. I understand this is a difficult time, but these matters are generally resolved more amicably when both parties engage constructively." The lawyer's voice had that practiced smoothness that came from years of delivering bad news to people who thought their lives were stable. "Mr. Mitchell, are you there?" "I'm here," Ryan said quietly. "Good. Now, Mrs. Mitchell has indicated that you've been experiencing some emotional difficulties following the revelation of her relationship with Mr. Coleman. She wants you to know that she hopes this process can be handled with minimal trauma for everyone involved." Ryan's grip tightened on the phone. Minimal trauma. That's correct. She's prepared to be quite reasonable in the property division, given the circumstances. Of course, there will need to be discussions about alimony and the disposition of the marital residence, but she's optimistic we can reach a fair agreement. "Fair," Ryan repeated. "Mr. Mitchell, I have to ask, do you have legal representation? Because if not, I'd strongly recommend you retain counsel before we proceed with any formal negotiations." Ryan stood up and walked to the motel window. Across the parking lot, a woman was loading suitcases into her car while 2 young children waited in the back seat. Starting over, just like he was supposed to do. "Mr. Park," Ryan said finally, "can I ask you something?" "Certainly. How long have you been doing this kind of work?" 15 years, Mr. Mitchell. I've handled hundreds of dissolution cases. And in your experience, how often do the cheating spouses end up happy with their new lives?" There was a pause. I'm not sure I understand the relevance of that question. Just curious about the success rate. Professionally speaking. Another pause, longer this time. Mr. Mitchell, I think it would be best if we scheduled a meeting. Are you available tomorrow afternoon? Actually, Mr. Park, I don't think that will be necessary. Sir, tell my wife, tell Mrs. Mitchell, that she shouldn't worry about me being reasonable. I've been reasonable for 3 years. I've been understanding and accommodating and everything a good husband should be. But I'm done being reasonable now. I'm not sure I follow. You will, Ryan said, and hung up. He sat back down on the bed and opened his laptop. Time to stop reacting and start planning. Tiffany and Brad thought they were dealing with a heartbroken, naive husband who would quietly accept whatever terms they offered. They were about to learn they were wrong about a lot of things. Ryan had spent his entire adult life following rules, honoring commitments, taking the high road. He'd been a good soldier, a faithful husband, a man who believed that doing the right thing mattered. But they'd changed the rules without telling him. And Ryan Mitchell was very, very good at adapting to new operational parameters. Chapter 4, Reconnaissance. Ryan checked out of the motel the next morning and found a furnished apartment in Tempe, close enough to Phoenix to monitor the situation, but far enough away to maintain operational security. The place was nothing special, 1 bedroom, basic furniture, but it came with a month-to-month lease and no questions asked. His first stop was a visit to his old Marine buddy, Tony Reeves, who ran a private investigation firm specializing in corporate security and domestic cases. Tony operated out of a strip mall office that looked unremarkable from the outside, but housed some of the most sophisticated surveillance equipment available to civilians. Jesus, Mitch, Tony said, using Ryan's old military nickname as they sat in his office. You look like hell. Feel worse, Ryan replied. I need a favor, Tony. A big one. Tony leaned back in his chair, studying his old friend. They'd served 2 tours together in Afghanistan, and Tony knew Ryan better than most people. This about your wife? Soon-to-be ex-wife. And her boyfriend. Tony nodded knowingly. You want surveillance? I want everything. Financial records, communications, travel patterns, business relationships. Everything legal, but I want to know more about these people than they know about themselves. Tony was quiet for a long moment. This going to stay legal, Mitch? The investigation will be. What I do with the information, that's going to depend on what we find. That's not exactly reassuring. Ryan met his friend's eyes. Tony, this woman played a 3-year con on me. Made me work myself half to death paying off debt she accumulated sleeping with another man. She's taking half of everything I own and expecting alimony on top of it. Legal isn't getting me justice. It's getting me screwed twice. Tony sighed and opened a new file on his computer. Tell me what you know. Over the next hour, Ryan provided everything he had on Tiffany and Brad. Tony took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When Ryan finished, Tony leaned back and shook his head. Your wife's got expensive taste for someone with no money, he observed. These restaurant receipts you found, the hotel charges, this affair's been going on for at least 18 months, probably longer. That's what I figured. And this Brad character, I know the type. Smooth talker, probably tells women exactly what they want to hear. His business model seems to be short-term consulting contracts with companies that don't do proper due diligence. Tony pulled up Brad's professional profile on his computer. Look at this pattern. Joins a company, promises big results, collects his fee, then moves on before anyone realizes the results aren't sustainable. It's not exactly fraud, but it's not exactly honest either. What about personal stuff? Well, his ex-wife is interesting. Melissa Coleman, remarried name is Torres now. Lives in Scottsdale, works as a real estate agent. According to the divorce filings, Brad was cheating on her too, with a client's wife, no less. She got a decent settlement, but more importantly, she might be willing to talk. Ryan nodded. Set up a meeting. What about your wife? What about her? Tony pulled up another screen. Tiffany's got some interesting financial habits. She's been living way above any reasonable income level for years. Credit cards maxed and paid off repeatedly, always just before they would have gone collections. Someone's been managing her debt very carefully. Meaning this isn't impulsive shopping. This is systematic. She's been planning something for a long time. and she's had help. Ryan felt something cold settle in his stomach. Her mother. Probably. But here's the thing, Mitch, if they've been planning this, they've made mistakes. People always do when they think they're smarter than everyone else. Tony turned his monitor toward Ryan. Your wife opened a new bank account 3 months ago. Business account, under the name TL Creative Consulting. She's been depositing money regularly, small amounts, but consistent. Where's the money coming from? That's what we're going to find out. But I'm betting when we trace it back, we're going to find some very interesting connections. Ryan stared at the account information. 3 months ago was right around the time Tiffany had started crying about her debt, begging him to help her. While he'd been working double shifts, she'd been opening secret accounts. How long will this take? Give me a week for the basic workup. 2 weeks if you want the deep dive. Deep dive, Ryan said without hesitation. It's going to cost. Tony. Ryan's voice was quiet but carried an edge that made his friend pause. I've got $40,000 in savings that I was planning to use to start a family. Instead, I used it to pay off debt my wife accumulated while cheating on me. Whatever this costs, it's an investment. Investment in what? Ryan stood up, extending his hand to shake Tony's. In making sure that actions have consequences. After leaving Tony's office, Ryan drove to the library and spent the rest of the day researching Arizona divorce law, community property statutes, and alimony requirements. He took pages of notes, cross-referencing different scenarios and outcomes. By the time he left, Ryan had a clear understanding of exactly how badly the legal system was about to screw him over. In Arizona, adultery wasn't grounds for denying alimony. Community property meant Tiffany was entitled to half of everything they'd acquired during the marriage, regardless of who earned it or who spent it foolishly. The system was designed to reward Tiffany's behavior and punish his loyalty. But systems had weaknesses. Every system did, and Ryan was very good at finding weaknesses. Chapter 5, The Setup. Melissa Torres agreed to meet Ryan at a coffee shop in Scottsdale, neutral territory, where she'd feel comfortable talking about her ex-husband. She was an attractive brunette in her early 30s, professionally dressed, but Ryan could see the wariness in her eyes when he approached her table. "You're sure you're not a reporter?" she asked as he sat down. "Just a man whose wife is making the same mistakes you did," Ryan replied honestly. Melissa studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Brad's type is very specific. Married women with money or access to money. He's got a gift for making them feel special, like they deserve better than whatever they have." "How long were you married?" 4 years. The affair I caught him in wasn't his first, just the first one I had proof of. She stirred her coffee absently. "He's very careful about covering his tracks, very good at manipulating situations, so he always comes out looking like the victim." "What do you mean?" "Brad doesn't just cheat. He strategically targets women he can profit from. The woman I caught him with was married to a man who owned a chain of restaurants." Suddenly Brad was consulting for restaurant management. Pure coincidence, right? Ryan felt pieces clicking into place. "What happened after your divorce?" "Brad tried to come back 6 months later, claiming he'd made a mistake, that he loved me. Turned out his restaurant consultation had ended badly. Something about promising results he couldn't deliver. He was probably looking for financial support while he found his next target." "Did he ever talk about future plans?" "Long-term goals." Melissa laughed bitterly. "Brad doesn't think long-term about anything except his next payday. But he did mention wanting to get into the restaurant business himself someday. Said he'd learned enough from his consulting work to know how to make one successful." After the meeting, Ryan drove to the Phoenix Art Gallery, where Tiffany claimed to work. The owner, a thin man in his 60s named Harrison Webb, seemed surprised when Ryan introduced himself as Tiffany's husband. "I didn't realize Tiffany was married," Harrison said, adjusting his glasses. "She's never mentioned a husband." "She's been working here for 3 years," Ryan said carefully. "Oh no, Mr. Mitchell. Tiffany hasn't worked here in over a year. She quit right around Christmas, said she was pursuing other opportunities." The lie was so casual, so complete, that Ryan almost admired its audacity. For months, Tiffany had been leaving the house every day, claiming to go to work at the gallery. Where had she actually been going? "Do you happen to remember what kind of opportunities she mentioned?" Harrison thought for a moment. Something about event planning, I think. She said she'd met someone who was going to help her start her own business. Ryan thanked Harrison and left, his mind racing. Event planning. Business opportunities. The mysterious bank account Tony had discovered suddenly made more sense. That evening, Ryan parked across the street from his old house and watched. At 7:30 p.m., Tiffany and Brad emerged, dressed for dinner. They climbed into Brad's BMW and drove toward downtown Phoenix. Ryan followed at a distance, his surveillance training making the tail easy and undetectable. They went to Vincent's, one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. Through the window, Ryan watched them celebrate something with champagne and dessert. Brad picked up the check without hesitation, and they lingered over coffee like they had all the time in the world. From the restaurant, they drove to a high-rise apartment complex in downtown Phoenix. The building was new, all glass and steel, with a doorman and valet parking. Ryan watched Brad hand his keys to the valet like he lived there. A quick conversation with the building's night security guard. Ryan claimed to be considering renting an apartment there, revealed that Brad Coleman had signed a lease 3 months ago for a 2-bedroom unit on the 20th floor. Monthly rent, $3,800. 3 months ago, the same time Tiffany had opened her business account and started crying about debt. Ryan sat in his truck across from the gleaming apartment building and felt the last of his illusions dissolve. This hadn't been an affair that got out of hand. This had been a coordinated campaign, planned and executed with military precision. They played him perfectly. The crying wife, the overwhelming debt, the need for his help. While he'd been working himself to exhaustion, they'd been planning their new life together in a luxury apartment he was indirectly paying for. His phone buzzed with a text from Tony. Got preliminary results. You need to see this ASAP. Ryan looked up at the apartment building one more time. Somewhere up there, his wife and her lover were probably toasting their success. Tomorrow, he'd learn exactly how deep their betrayal went. But tonight, Ryan Mitchell began planning their destruction. Chapter 6. The Foundation. Tony's office felt different the next morning, charged with the electric tension that came before bad news. Ryan sat across from his friend's desk while Tony organized a stack of documents and photographs. You were right about the planning, Tony began. This goes back almost 2 years, Mitch. Maybe longer. He slid the first document across the desk. Brad Coleman didn't just randomly meet your wife. He was hired by a restaurant called Meridian to consult on their marketing strategy 18 months ago. Guess who was catering their grand opening event? Ryan looked at the invoice. TL Creative Consulting. Your wife's been running a side business for almost 2 years, providing event planning and catering coordination for upscale venues. She never told you because the income would have meant she didn't qualify for alimony. Tony slid over more documents. Here's where it gets interesting. Brad's consulting contract with Meridian was supposed to be 6 months, but he's been collecting payments for 18 months, and Meridian's revenue has actually declined in that time. He's bleeding them dry. Worse, he's positioned himself as indispensable while systematically undermining their profitability. When they finally collapse, and they will in the next few months, guess who's going to swoop in and buy the assets at bankruptcy prices? Ryan studied the financial projections Tony had compiled. Brad and Tiffany, through a shell company they established 4 months ago, BC Development, LLC. They've already secured preliminary financing based on projections that assume they'll acquire Meridian's customer base and equipment for pennies on the dollar. The scope of the deception was breathtaking. While Ryan had been working double shifts to pay off Tiffany's debt, she and Brad had been constructing an elaborate business scheme that would make them wealthy at the expense of everyone around them. There's more, Tony continued. Remember that debt you paid off? Most of it wasn't shopping sprees and spa days. It was startup capital, equipment purchases and corporation fees, insurance deposits, all disguised as personal expenses. So I funded their business venture. Without knowing it, yeah. And here's the beautiful part. Legally, they're probably in the clear. Deceptive as hell, but not technically fraud. Ryan sat back in his chair, processing the information. What about the restaurant they're targeting? Meridian? Family-owned business, been around for 12 years. The owner, Patricia Hendricks, is a widow trying to keep her late husband's dream alive. She's got 2 employees, both single mothers who've been with her since the beginning. Tony slid over a photograph of Patricia Hendricks, a woman in her 50s with graying hair and tired eyes. She has no idea what's happening to her business. All she knows is that revenue's been declining despite Brad's expensive marketing campaigns. Ryan studied the photo, thinking about his own situation. How many lives were Brad and Tiffany willing to destroy for their ambitions? What's their timeline? Based on the financing documents, they need to move within the next 60 days. Brad's been accelerating Meridian's decline, canceling successful advertising contracts, pushing expensive initiatives that don't generate revenue. Patricia's going to be forced into bankruptcy soon. And then they buy her out for maybe 20 cents on the dollar. She'll lose everything. They'll gain a profitable business. And legally, they've done nothing wrong. Ryan was quiet for several minutes, studying the documents. Finally, he looked up at Tony. I need you to do something else for me. What? I need you to arrange a meeting with Patricia Hendricks. Anonymously. Tell her someone wants to warn her about her marketing consultant. Tony frowned. Mitch, if you're thinking about exposing Brad's scheme. I'm not thinking about exposing it, Ryan said quietly. I'm thinking about something else entirely. Such as? Ryan gathered the documents and stood up. Brad and Tiffany want to play games with people's lives? Fine, but they're about to learn that some people play for keeps. That afternoon, Ryan met Patricia Hendricks at a restaurant during the slow period between lunch and dinner. Meridian was exactly the kind of place Ryan appreciated: honest food, reasonable prices, the kind of neighborhood establishment that formed the backbone of local communities. Patricia was as tired as her photograph suggested, but her handshake was firm and her eyes were intelligent. Tony Reeves said you had information about my marketing consultant? I do, Ryan said, sitting across from her in a booth near the back. But first, I want to ask you something. If you could save your restaurant, what would you be willing to do? Anything legal, she replied without hesitation. Good, because what I'm about to tell you is going to be hard to hear, but it's going to give you a chance to fight back. Over the next hour, Ryan explained everything. Brad's systematic sabotage, the planned bankruptcy acquisition, the shell company waiting to scoop up her life's work. He showed her the financial projections, the timeline, the evidence of deliberate manipulation. Patricia listened in growing horror, occasionally asking for clarification, but mostly sitting in stunned silence. When Ryan finished, she sat back and closed her eyes. 18 months, she whispered. 18 months, I've been blaming myself, thinking I was failing somehow. You weren't failing. You were being destroyed by someone who saw your trust as a vulnerability to exploit. What can I do? I can't afford lawyers. I can't. Mrs. Hendricks, Ryan said gently. What if I told you there was a way to not only save your restaurant, but to make the people who tried to destroy it pay for what they've done? She opened her eyes and looked at him. I'd say that sounds too good to be true. It's not going to be easy, and it's going to require you to trust me even though you don't know me. But if you're willing to fight, I can give you the weapons you need. Patricia Hendricks had spent 18 months watching her husband's dream slowly die, believing it was her fault. Now she understood she'd been the victim of a carefully orchestrated campaign of destruction. What do you need me to do? She asked. Ryan smiled for the first time in weeks. I need you to pretend to be exactly as desperate as they think you are. And I need you to help me set a trap. Chapter 7. The Trap. Ryan spent the next week building what he privately called the Foundation, a complex web of legal documents, financial arrangements, and strategic relationships that would support what came next. His years in the military had taught him that successful operations required detailed planning and multiple contingencies. His first stop was a meeting with Jennifer Walsh, one of Phoenix's most respected family law attorneys. Jennifer was known for her aggressive advocacy and her ability to find creative solutions to complex domestic situations. Mr. Mitchell, she said, reviewing the documents Ryan had provided. This is quite a situation. Your wife has been systematically deceiving you for years, but legally, you're still going to be at a disadvantage in the divorce proceedings. Because Arizona is a no-fault state. Exactly. Her adultery doesn't impact property division or alimony calculations. She's entitled to half of the marital assets and potentially substantial spousal support, regardless of her behavior. Ryan nodded. What if I could prove fraud? Jennifer looked up sharply. What kind of fraud? Identity theft. Forgery. Using marital assets for undisclosed business ventures. Ryan slid another document across her desk. I hired a forensic accountant to examine our joint credit card statements. Tiffany forged my signature on at least 12 major purchases, claiming I had authorized them. Jennifer studied the forensic report, her eyebrows rising. Mr. Mitchell, if this is accurate, your wife committed multiple felonies during your marriage. That changes everything. How so? Arizona law allows courts to disproportionately divide marital assets when one spouse has dissipated community property through illegal activities. Instead of a 50-50 split, you could retain up to 80% of your assets. And spousal support? She'd be lucky to get anything. Ryan had spent considerable time and money obtaining the forensic analysis, but it was worth it. Every signature Tiffany had forged, every fraudulent charge she'd made, was now documented evidence of criminal behavior. What's the next step? We file for divorce immediately, citing fraud and identity theft. We also file for emergency asset protection to prevent her from liquidating or hiding property before the case is resolved. Jennifer paused, studying Ryan carefully. Mr. Mitchell, I have to ask, are you planning to file criminal charges against your wife? That depends on her behavior during the divorce proceedings. Meanwhile, Patricia Hendricks was playing her part perfectly. Following Ryan's instructions, she had approached Brad with desperation that wasn't entirely feigned, begging him to help save her failing restaurant. I don't know what else to do, she told Brad during their meeting, which Ryan was recording through surveillance equipment Tony had provided. Revenue's down 40% from last year. I'm 3 months behind on supplier payments. Brad adopted his most sympathetic expression. Patricia, I've been trying to warn you about market conditions. The restaurant business is brutal right now. Is there anything you can do? Any strategy we haven't tried? Well, Brad said slowly, as if the idea was just occurring to him, there might be one option, but it would require significant changes to your business model. Anything. I'll try anything. I've been working with some investors who specialize in restaurant turnarounds. They might be willing to come in as partners, provide immediate capital injection, help modernize your operations. Patricia looked hopeful. What would that involve? You'd retain operational control, of course, but they'd need majority ownership to justify the investment. Say, 60-40 split. Ryan, listening to the recording later, marveled at Brad's audacity. He was offering to save Patricia's restaurant by stealing it from her and making it sound like he was doing her a favor. I need to think about it, Patricia said. Of course. But Patricia, these investors won't wait long. They have other opportunities they're considering. After Brad left, Patricia met with Ryan at a coffee shop across town. She looked shaken by the experience. He's worse than you described, she said. The way he talks, it's like he genuinely believes he's helping me. Sociopaths often do, Ryan replied. They're very good at justifying their behavior, even to themselves. What happens now? Now we let him think he's won. Tell him you want to meet with his investors. Set up the meeting for next Friday evening, here at the restaurant after closing. And then, Ryan's expression was cold. Then Brad Coleman learns what happens when you try to destroy innocent people for profit. That same week, Ryan received a call from David Park, Tiffany's divorce attorney. Mr. Mitchell, I understand you've retained counsel. I was hoping we could arrange a meeting between all parties to discuss settlement terms. I'm not interested in settling, Ryan replied. Sir, I think you should understand that litigation is expensive and time-consuming. Mrs. Mitchell is prepared to be reasonable. Mr. Park, Ryan interrupted, has your client mentioned her business activities to you? There was a pause. I'm not sure what you mean. Ask her about TL Creative Consulting. Ask her about BC Development, LLC. And ask her about the restaurant venture she's been planning with Brad Coleman. Another longer pause. Mr. Mitchell, are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating facts that will come out during discovery. Facts that paint a very different picture of my wife's financial situation and her reasons for seeking divorce. Ryan hung up before the lawyer could respond. Within an hour, his phone was ringing with calls from Tiffany. He let them all go to voicemail. The messages started confused and escalated to angry. What did you tell my lawyer? Call me back right now. Ryan, whatever you think, you know you're wrong. We need to talk. Stop being childish. I know you're hurt, but ruining my life won't make you feel better. Fine. If you want to play games, we'll play games. But you won't win. Ryan deleted the messages without listening to all of them. Tiffany was beginning to understand that her carefully constructed plan was falling apart, but she still didn't comprehend the scope of what was coming. That would change soon enough. Chapter 8: The Reckoning. Friday evening arrived with the kind of desert sunset that painted the sky in shades of amber and crimson. Ryan sat in Tony's surveillance van outside Meridian Restaurant, watching as Brad Coleman arrived for what he believed would be his final conquest of Patricia Hendricks' business. All recording equipment is active, Tony reported from the driver's seat. Video, audio, everything's crystal clear. And the backup? Jennifer Walsh is standing by at her office. The moment we get what we need, she'll file the emergency motions. Ryan watched Brad check his appearance in his car side mirror before walking into the restaurant. He was dressed in an expensive suit, carrying a leather portfolio that probably cost more than most people made in a week. The picture of success built on other people's destruction. Inside the restaurant, Patricia Hendricks was setting the stage perfectly. The dining room was empty except for a single table set for 3, dim lighting creating an intimate atmosphere that would encourage Brad to be indiscreet. At 7 p.m. exactly, a woman entered the restaurant. Ryan recognized her immediately from the photographs Tony had compiled. Tiffany, dressed in business attire that looked like it had cost more than Ryan's monthly salary. Interesting, Tony murmured. Your wife's playing the role of silent investor. Through their surveillance equipment, Ryan could hear the conversation beginning inside. Patricia, I'd like you to meet my business partner, Brad was saying. Tiffany Lambert. She represents the investment group I mentioned. Ryan noted that Tiffany was using her maiden name, another layer of deception in case anything went wrong. Ms. Lambert, Patricia said, shaking Tiffany's hand. Thank you for considering my restaurant. Of course, Tiffany replied smoothly. Brad's told me wonderful things about Meridian. We're always looking for opportunities to support local businesses. The irony was breathtaking. These two people, who had spent the last 18 months systematically destroying Patricia's livelihood, were now positioning themselves as her saviors. Shall we discuss terms? Brad asked, opening his portfolio. For the next 30 minutes, Ryan listened as Brad and Tiffany outlined their investment proposal. They offered to purchase 60% of the restaurant for $40,000, roughly a tenth of what the business was actually worth. In exchange, they would provide operational expertise and marketing innovation. What they were really offering was to buy Patricia's life's work for less than the cost of her kitchen equipment, then rebrand it as their own success story. This is very generous, Patricia said, playing her role perfectly. But I have to ask, how can you be sure the restaurant will be profitable under new management? Brad smiled condescendingly. Patricia, the truth is, your marketing strategies have been outdated. What you need is fresh thinking, modern approaches to customer acquisition and retention. You mean the marketing strategies you've been implementing for 18 months? Brad's smile faltered slightly. Well, yes, but we were limited by budget constraints. With proper investment, the budget you recommended, Patricia continued. The advertising contracts you negotiated. The promotional campaigns you designed. Now Brad looked confused. Patricia, I'm not sure what you're getting at. Patricia reached under the table and brought out a folder. I'm getting at this, Mr. Coleman. She opened the folder and spread out the documents Ryan had provided. Financial projections showing Meridian's decline, evidence of Brad's systematic sabotage, proof of the shell company he and Tiffany had established. What is this? Tiffany asked, leaning forward to examine the papers. This is documentation of your plan to bankrupt my restaurant so you could buy it cheaply, Patricia said calmly. 18 months of deliberate sabotage, marketed as professional consultation. Brad's face went pale. Patricia, I don't know where you got this information, but I got it from someone who cares about justice, Patricia interrupted. Someone who understands what it's like to be betrayed by people you trusted. Tiffany was studying the documents, her expression growing more alarmed by the moment. "These are confidential business plans," she said. "How did you—" She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes widening as she recognized something in the paperwork. "Ryan," she whispered. "That's right," Patricia said. "Your husband provided all of this information, along with some very interesting details about your marriage and your business activities." Brad looked confused. "Husband? Tiffany, you said you were single." "I'm getting divorced," Tiffany said quickly, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. "Are you?" Patricia asked. "Because according to the divorce filings I've seen, your husband is claiming fraud, identity theft, forgery, the kind of charges that carry prison sentences." The restaurant fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Brad was staring at Tiffany with growing understanding, while Tiffany looked like she was trying to calculate her chances of escape. "This is harassment," Brad said finally. "We came here in good faith to help your business. And You came here to steal my business," Patricia corrected. "Just like you stole from your ex-wife. Just like you've stolen from every client who trusted you." She stood up and walked to the restaurant's front door, which she locked with a decisive click. "What are you doing?" Tiffany asked, alarm creeping into her voice. "Making sure we finish this conversation," Patricia replied. In the surveillance van, Tony looked at Ryan. "This is it. We've got them on tape admitting to the scheme, we've got evidence of their relationship, and we've got Tiffany using a false name in a business context." Ryan nodded. "Call Jennifer. Tell her to file everything." But Ryan wasn't done yet. He got out of the van and walked across the street to Meridian's front door. Through the window, he could see Brad and Tiffany sitting frozen at their table, while Patricia stood with her arms crossed, blocking their exit. Ryan tried the door and found it locked. Patricia saw him and walked over to let him in. "Hello, Tiffany," Ryan said as he entered the restaurant. "Fancy meeting you here." His wife's face went through a series of expressions: shock, fear, anger, and finally, a kind of desperate calculation. "Ryan," she said, forcing a smile, "this isn't what it looks like." "Really?" "Because it looks like you and your boyfriend are trying to steal this woman's restaurant, just like you tried to steal my life." Brad started to stand up. "Look, I don't know who you are, but—" "Sit down," Ryan said quietly, and something in his voice made Brad comply immediately. Ryan walked to the table and sat across from his wife. 3 years, Tiffany. 3 years of marriage, and it was all a lie." "That's not true," she said, but her voice was weak. "The debt I paid off wasn't shopping sprees, was it? It was startup capital for your business with Brad. You used me as an unwitting investor, then planned to divorce me and take half of everything else I owned." Tiffany's composed facade was cracking. "You don't understand the pressure I was under. The expectations." "Whose expectations? Your mother's? Brad's? Or just your own greed?" Ryan leaned forward, his voice still calm, but carrying an edge that made everyone in the restaurant nervous. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to dissolve BC Development and return every penny you stole from Meridian's marketing budget to Patricia. You're going to sign a divorce agreement that gives you nothing, no alimony, no property settlement, nothing. And you're going to hope I don't decide to file criminal charges for identity theft and fraud." "You can't," Brad started. "I can," Ryan interrupted. "I have forensic evidence of at least 15 felonies committed during my marriage. And now I have evidence of your conspiracy to defraud Patricia's business. The question is whether you cooperate or whether this ends with both of you in prison." Tiffany was crying now, but Ryan felt no sympathy. These weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration that her carefully constructed plan had failed. "What do you want?" she whispered. Ryan stood up and looked down at the woman he'd once loved. "I want you to understand that actions have consequences. I want you to know what it feels like to lose everything because of someone else's betrayal." He turned to Patricia. "The restaurant is yours, free and clear. The evidence we've gathered will ensure they can't try this again with anyone else." To Brad, he said, "Your consulting business is finished in Phoenix. I'd suggest you find another city, preferably one where they don't check references too carefully." Ryan walked to the door, then paused and looked back at Tiffany one last time. "You said I was too limited, too noble for my own good. You were wrong about the noble part. But you were right about one thing. I am limited. I'm limited by a moral code that prevented me from seeing what you really were. I won't make that mistake again. He unlocked the door and stepped out into the desert night, leaving his former life behind. Chapter 9. New Foundations. 6 months later, Ryan stood in the kitchen of Meridian Restaurant, helping Patricia prep for the lunch rush. The business had not just survived, it was thriving. Word had spread about Patricia's story, and the community had rallied around the restaurant with the kind of fierce loyalty that money couldn't buy. "Order up," Patricia called, sliding 2 plates across the pass. Table 6. Ryan carried the meals to a young couple celebrating their anniversary. They thanked him with the kind of genuine warmth he'd forgotten existed. Simple interactions, honest work, people who meant what they said. It was a different world from the one he'd inhabited with Tiffany. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago. Jennifer Walsh had proven as ruthless as advertised, using the evidence of Tiffany's fraud to secure a settlement that left Ryan with full ownership of their house, his retirement accounts, and even reimbursement for the debt he'd paid off. Tiffany had received exactly what she'd contributed to their marriage: nothing. The criminal charges had been another matter. Ryan had ultimately decided not to file them, not out of mercy, but out of pragmatism. Tiffany and Brad's scheme had collapsed so completely that pursuing criminal prosecution would have been like shooting at ghosts. Brad had left Phoenix within a week of the confrontation at Meridian, his reputation in ruins. The business community was small and interconnected, and word of his methods had spread quickly. His consulting practice had evaporated overnight. Tiffany had moved back in with her mother in Tucson, her dreams of restaurant ownership reduced to a part-time job at a coffee shop. The apartment she and Brad had shared was in foreclosure, another victim of their overextended ambitions. "Ryan," Patricia called from behind the counter. "Your friend Tony's here." Ryan walked over to where Tony was sitting at the bar, reading a newspaper and drinking coffee. "How's the PI business?" Ryan asked. "Can't complain. Actually had 3 new clients this week. All of them referred by attorneys who heard about our work on your case." Tony folded his newspaper and looked at his friend. "You look good, Mitch." "Relax. I feel good. Honest work, honest people, honest pay. Turns out that's all I ever really wanted. No regrets about the restaurant business?" Patricia offered to make you a partner. Ryan shook his head. "This isn't my dream, it's hers. I'm just helping her protect it." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the lunch crowd. Families, business people, elderly couples who'd been coming to Meridian for years. The kind of community that formed naturally around places that provided genuine value. "Ryan," Patricia called. "Phone for you." Ryan walked to the office and picked up the call. It was Jennifer Walsh. "Mr. Mitchell, I have some interesting news. Tiffany's mother called this morning." "Gloria? What did she want?" "She's concerned about her daughter's situation. Apparently, Tiffany's been having difficulty finding work, and Gloria was wondering if you might be willing to help with some financial support." Ryan was quiet for a long moment. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that ship had sailed, but I wanted you to know in case she tries to contact you directly." "She won't," Ryan said with certainty. "Gloria is smarter than that. There's something else. I got a call from an attorney in Tucson representing someone named Bradley Coleman." Ryan's attention sharpened. "What does Brad want?" "He's claiming you interfered with his business relationships, cost him income and reputation. He's threatening to sue for damages." Ryan actually laughed. "Let him try. We have hours of recorded evidence of him committing fraud. Any lawsuit he files will just give us another forum to present that evidence publicly." That's what I told his attorney. "I don't think we'll hear from him again." After hanging up, Ryan returned to the dining room, where Patricia was dealing with a minor crisis. They'd run out of their signature dessert and had 3 tables asking for it. "We could make more," she said, "but it takes 2 hours to set properly." "What about that bakery down the street?" Ryan suggested. "Their chocolate cake is almost as good as yours. We could offer it as a substitute with a discount." Patricia nodded and made the call. The customers were understanding, even appreciative of the honesty and the discount. Problems solved through straightforward communication. Another concept that felt revolutionary after years of living with deception. As the day wound down, Ryan found himself thinking about the path that had brought him here. A year ago, He'd been working overnight shifts to pay off debt he didn't know was fraudulent, married to a woman who saw him as a resource to be exploited. Now, he was part of a community, contributing to something that mattered, surrounded by people who valued honesty over manipulation. The phone call from Gloria had been predictable. Narcissists always came back when they needed something, convinced that their previous victims would eventually forget and forgive. But Ryan's capacity for forgiveness had been permanently altered by Tiffany's betrayal. He'd learned the difference between mercy and enabling, between compassion and weakness. Some people deserved second chances. Others had forfeited their right to his consideration. As closing time approached, Patricia started cleaning the coffee machine while Ryan wiped down tables. The routine had become comfortable, purposeful in a way his old life had never been. "Ryan," Patricia said, not looking up from her work, "I want you to know something." "What's that?" "When you first approached me about Brad and Tiffany, I thought you might be just another angry ex-husband looking for revenge. What changed your mind?" "The way you insisted on protecting my employees during the confrontation. The way you made sure they got bonuses when the business improved. The way you turned down partnership in the restaurant because you said it belonged to me and my family." Patricia finally looked at him. "Revenge would have been about hurting them. What you did was about protecting people. There's a difference." Ryan nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Revenge was personal, selfish, ultimately unsatisfying. Justice was about restoring balance, protecting the innocent, ensuring that actions had appropriate consequences. He'd sought justice, not revenge. And in finding it, he discovered something more valuable than satisfaction. He'd found peace. The last customer left, and Ryan locked the front door while Patricia finished the cash register. Tomorrow they'd open again, serve honest food to grateful customers, and continue building something worthwhile. Ryan Mitchell had learned that some betrayals couldn't be forgiven, some people couldn't be trusted, and some relationships couldn't be salvaged. But he'd also learned that endings could become beginnings, that destruction could clear the ground for something better, and that a man's character wasn't determined by how he handled success. It was determined by how he handled betrayal. As he walked to his truck, Ryan thought about Tiffany one last time, not with anger or regret, but with a kind of cold satisfaction. She tried to break him, tried to use him, tried to discard him when she was finished. Instead, she'd set him free. And freedom, Ryan had discovered, was worth any price. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.